and our dear friend, Larry Wilkerson, is here with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Good to be with you, Nima, finally. My fault. Apologize to all your listeners. Couldn't get my computer squared away. Finally did.
Yeah, we finally solved it. Yeah. Larry, let me start with the current situation in which Donald Trump is. You look at the way that he's posting on his social accounts, on his X, on his through social. He's saying that Iran is out of, their air defense system is gone, their navy is gone, their leadership is gone, everything is gone, and we are at the best position. And today I talked with Professor Mane. He's just laughing out at me. What is he talking about? And what is your understanding on the current situation? The war that is happening between Iran and the United States.
First, all that you just reported are lies. There's no doubt in my mind they're lies. I don't know if Trump is making the lies up out of whole cloth or he's actually being given them by some of the people in his cabinet or his personal coterie of advisors that are giving him that information. I wouldn't be surprised at the latter, but I also wouldn't be surprised at the former, that he's making some of this up out of whole cloth. The situation couldn't be more opposite, in fact. What we have is, as you probably have intuited if you don't know, is we have a battle between a 3,000 year, some would say longer than that, empire with a history and record that empire vests in its Persian population in particular, and at best a 250 to 300-year-old, if you consider our colonial period and our national period, entity. I'll give you two guesses as to who is going to outlast whom in that kind of struggle. That's the first consideration of Clausewitz's concept of war. You must understand the nature of the war upon which you're embarking, and then you must pay close attention to how that nature colors whatever it is you have planned to do against that backdrop. That has not been done. I heard Doug McGregor this morning, and I listened to him at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I couldn't have agreed more with almost every word he uttered to that effect. And Doug probably knows the military ramifications better than I because he's more recently in the military than I. I've been out a long time. But I will tell you this, they have totally misjudged the nature of this conflict. And they partly have done so because Bibi Netanyahu has led them down the primrose path in interpreting that nature because he has grossly either misinterpreted it himself, which I doubt, but he has not understood the status of the empire, if you will, against that nature. Now, what do I mean by that? First of all, I mean, this is a long war, not a short war. Donald Trump does not want a long war. His political apparatus does not want a long war. He's got other plans like the midterms, like whatever he was going to do domestically to change the impact of those midterms, which right now are turning really negative for him. He's got other concerns. He does not want this war to go on. He wants it to deflect the attention from Epstein. He wants it to make money for his family, which it's already done because they played the market. They knew when we were going to attack. And this poppycock being put out by Netanyahu and others that Israel led us into the war. They were planning for this war in December. They were planning astutely and detailed, the tip fids and everything else. Time phase force deployment data that computers use to deploy major forces in the world. They were doing it in December. So this has been planned for some time. The scenario developed a little bit differently, I think, than they expected, but not that much. And they again planned the deception. They planned to be in the middle of negotiations when they initiated the war. It is not the war they thought it was going to be. Netanyahu's decapitation strategy, which hardly ever works, I don't know why he keeps using it, has actually rebounded to their discredit and ultimately to their defeat in this conflict. Because what he's done is unified for the first time in a long time that I'm aware of, really unified Shia and Sunni. They are all up in arms and angry about what's happening to Iran, whether it's the uncalled for assassination of the Ayatollah or whether it's the lies that are being spewed. You have riots going on at Incirlik in Turkey, our base there. I don't think we're long-lived in Turkey in that base. And you have people rising up around the world and saying things that they never would have said before. And you have people attacking our consulate, if you will, in Pakistan, in Karachi, that I helped put the safety windows in the windows up because we understood how vulnerable it was right after 9/11. And I was watching them hit these windows with pickaxes and with shovels and sledgehammers, and they're bouncing off because those windows are very, very expensive safety windows now. All to say that this conflict is very different from what Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and Pete Hegseth thought it was going to be. I have to consider that General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, might have had an inkling of this, and that's why we heard some pushback possibly coming from him at the last moment, that maybe this is not what we wanted to do. I don't know. I can't confirm that with any of my military contacts, but if he did, he was a smart man. That's the first point. This is a long, long conflict. It isn't going to be over anytime soon. Second point is Iran did something that I thought militarily was a little unwise until I realized that they were operating at a higher strategic level than I. And their strategic approach is fairly sound, I think. They are attacking people in the region, and this is just going to increase, that one would say we're neutral in this. We're awaiting the outcome, if you will, to see which way they flowed, or we're even favorable towards Iran. Qatar being one in question, with Al Udeid being there, the biggest Air Force base for the U.S. in the region. What they're doing is they're attacking selectively targets in the Arab countries and elsewhere, either as in Cyprus, that represent a European intrusion into the conflict, and thank you, Europe, you didn't need to do that. Or in the more important case of the Arabs, they're attacking them because they know that even though Saudi Arabia, for example, is 20% Shia, maybe a little higher than that, basically Sunni, there's unity forming and shaping amongst these people because they don't like their leaders at all. And so when you start hitting Bahrain, for example, and having the Bahrainis cheer that you just struck the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters, cheering in the street, you notice that this strategy is beginning to work. Whether or not the streets will rise up in the Arab world or anywhere in the region and actually overthrow their aristocratic, get the word out, Larry, autocratic leaders or not is another question, but it's an astute strategy, really, because there are thousands, if not millions, of people in the region who ultimately, at the bottom of the can, so to speak, empathize and sympathize with Iran, not with Saudi Arabia, not with any of the other countries that are in this potentially, certainly not with Jordan, not with Egypt, not with Iraq, except as Iran has facilities in Iraq. So you're looking at a regional conflict now that might engulf some of these leaders that should have been overthrown a long time ago. And incidentally, the only reason they haven't been is because of their support from the United States. That's the draconian reason behind Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed, and all the other rulers in the region, including the one in Egypt. The only thing that keeps them in power is the money we keep sending them, or the arms we keep sending them, or both. So that's the second component. The third component is I don't think anybody in the region, in Europe, I don't think anybody in the world, except maybe Moscow and maybe Beijing, understands what it means to have the world's #1 economic power and allied with the world's #1 hardened military and industrial base, Russia, allied with Iran in a trilateral alliance. We haven't seen the impact of that really yet, but we're going to. We're going to, especially when we start seeing the straits closed and the Chinese and the Russians backing that, because we're looking at the Bab el-Mandeb. The Red Sea is about 60 to 70% of the global commerce of the world. It's not all oil and gas. In fact, it's a lower percentage of that than the Strait of Hormuz. It's everything. It's virtually everything. And it means the Suez Canal is closed to all but traffic opposed to Israel. That's the way the Al-Ansar, the Houthis, are going to do it. So we couldn't open the Red Sea before. Remember, we lost billions of dollars trying to close the Houthis' efforts to close the Bab el-Mandeb and keep shipping out of the Red Sea. They've done it, and they'll be back doing it again. And they will have not only the munitions capability that Iran can provide them, but also Russia and China, because it's in their interest. The Al-Ansar will not stop traffic that is flowing for the benefit of those allied with Iran, but it will stop the other traffic. And that'll be enough, plus the Strait of Hormuz is already having impact. That'll be enough to raise prices around the world. It's enough to raise oil prices instantly. It's already doing so. West Texas Intermediate and Brent crude are already going up. And I did this game in 2009 in Beijing when we were friendly. The Japanese, the Chinese, everybody was there. We went to $280 a barrel before the crisis was sort of eased. And we only disrupted two major production facilities in the world, one that counted on the Strait of Malacca and the other one that counted on the Strait of Hormuz. At that time, it was called Ras Tanura in Saudi Arabia. That's all you have to do to scare the insurers, to scare the shippers, and essentially to drive the price of oil in stratospheric fashion, which benefits whom most of all? Russia. Russia will be selling. India's already shifted. India has already shifted its oil requests to Russia. So we got rid of that one quick. India gets an enormous amount of its oil through the Gulf. I saw the percentages yesterday. I was shocked by them. Don't remember exactly what it is, but it's much higher than China. China's about 20%. India gets much more. And you can understand why. It's a very short route around there to India. And India is going to be in this too before it's over with, because that's enormously important to them. And their economy will be virtually wrecked if you get oil going to over 100 and maybe even 150 or higher dollars per barrel. So this is this is a regional threatening to be a global conflict. And we don't understand it. Back to Clausewitz again. We do not understand what we have started. We think it's a simple punishment mission to bring Iran to its knees. Netanyahu wants a little bit further. He wants complete chaos in Iran or a quisling regime. I think he wants complete chaos because he figures that's better than having anybody in there, whether it was the Pahlavi family member or whatever. He wants complete chaos, just like he got in Syria initially. That's the real problem right now. We don't understand what we're in. And then let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about munitions. Iran has been extremely smart. They have learned, and they should have learned. They've had a lot of experience with this duplicitous diplomacy, attacks in the middle of it, and so forth. So what they've done is exactly what Doug McGregor was saying, and what I've said too. That is, they fired their least expensive, but deadly if they get through, drones and other things at Israel and at other targets. And we are expending very expensive missiles that in some cases, you've got to go all the way back to Diego Garcia to get the cranes and the leverage and everything that'll actually reload the tubes. So that's a couple of days transit and maybe a day in port in order to load the new, and there aren't a whole lot of them. You can make about 2 of those trips and that's it, we're out. So the Iranians are causing the Israelis in particular, but us too, to shoot all these sophisticated missiles that cost 5-6 times what they're shooting down at Iran's targets. Once that's done, and by the way, some of those are getting through. I saw one hit Tel Aviv this morning. Some of them are getting through. They're not being shot down. So they're already failing, but the next wave is going to be far more sophisticated, and the next wave even more sophisticated, and the next wave probably Mach 3, Mach 4 hypersonic missiles, the most sophisticated of all. And Israel is going to disappear under a shroud of fire and smoke. I mean, that's the reality of it. And the Iranians are just going to go ploddingly forward. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. And we're going to continue to try to take out these ballistic missile firing sites. And we're going to find that there's just too many of them. They're too well hidden underground, and they only have to pop out for a moment to shoot. We're going to find out the same thing we would have found out with North Korea in terms of their cannon artillery arrayed north of Seoul. In that case, 30,000 rounds were going to be fired and fall on Seoul, greater metropolitan area, in about 10 hours. In other words, you wouldn't have a Seoul metropolitan area anymore. You'd have a lot of dead Americans and so forth. Another issue there, we didn't plan. Nima, after 9/11, I was responsible for looking at some of the embassies and consulates for NEOs, for non-combatant evacuation operations. We went over the F-77 forms. We went through how many do you have to evacuate? What are your capabilities? How much of the civilian reserve air fleet do you need, possibly? How much of the military air fleet do you need? How much time do you need? When should you start? And many would say we should start well before hostilities because we can't get them out otherwise. Well, look what we're looking at right now. You just saw it this morning. We cannot, the embassies in the area have said we cannot evacuate our people. We simply can't. We don't have the methodology. We don't have the means and so forth. So you're looking at a lot of Americans and others being trapped in the region right now, and Iran doesn't give a damn. They're going to kill them too. And that was a big fault of the administration because they didn't start evacuating people because they didn't think this would be a long war and they didn't think the Iranians would persevere. I got news for them. Again, the nature of the conflict. We're up against a vested former empire. We're up against 53% of that empire being Persian. We're up against a resilience we never guessed on, that Netanyahu never guessed on. He thought it would disappear, and we're going to suffer, and we're going to suffer badly. The question in my mind right now, the operational question, this is not a strategic question, but it is an important question, is how long will we endure? Because the Iranians aren't going to go. When we say mea culpa, when we say we want to talk behind the scenes, of course, we'll never say it up front and out loud. They're going to say, sorry, bud, we're waging war and we're perfectly content to keep on doing it. That's the dilemma we're in.
Yeah. Larry, today we've learned that the second American THAAD anti-missile defense system was hit by a precision missile from Iran. And this is the second THAAD to be taken out in the West Asia. Yesterday, it was a radar, THAAD radar, in this station at Al Ruwais, if I'm not right, Al Ruwais base in the UAE. And on the other hand, we've learned that the Trump administration is trying to bring the THAAD system that is in South Korea to this region. It seems that they're running out of not only interceptors, but the air defense system itself. How do you see that, the way that the United States, on the other, Larry, these attacks on the air bases in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, Arab states, it has many things to do with, with the air defense system of Israel. These are the eyes of the air defense system of Israel that they have been neutralized. How do you see the overall situation considering the air defense system?
I think it's a disaster. I think it's an absolute disaster. And what you said about Korea is a good point to bring up. And it's something I left out in my disquisition about the real strategic realities here. Our allies are watching this. Korea is not happy with our presence on the island. The new leader in Japan, who is probably the best leader I've seen in the LDP since World War II, a woman, you might expect that, they are looking hard at the security agreement, and they're going to make some monumental decisions in terms of our security and their own security within the next 12 to 18 months, I think. And she's going to be at the helm of this. Korea is going to make the same decisions. The more this happens, the more, for example, that we drain South Korea in terms of its real capability to defend itself of assets and show them what we really care about the peninsula, the more inclined they're going to be to kick us off. I don't give us more than 24 months before the Koreans have said something really solid and negative for us about our presence on the peninsula. I feel the same way about the security relationship with Japan. That's the other ramification of this conflict, and the nature of it is that it is going to sour our allies, if not the entire world, on the number one pariah state in the world after Israel, us. We are becoming an outcast empire. We're becoming people whom no one is going to want to do business with. Xi Jinping's already declared he's going to replace the dollar with the renminbi. Power is, as I've said so many times, and will keep saying until I die, power is going to the east. And we are fighting it tooth and nail in a manner that is actually accelerating that power leaving us and going there, instead of accommodating it and trying to deal with it and using the crises we all face, like nuclear weapons and climate change, to more or less cement some sort of peer power alliance. We're defying the realities in the world, and we're defying them in such a way, such an ignorant and ill-led and non-strategic way, that we're hastening our own demise. And this is a quintessential example of that, starting this war.
It's the same considering the Arab states. They were talking, MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed called Putin yesterday. It seems that they're begging to Putin to do something considering the conflict, but I don't see anything of that sort would happen, because the situation, they have somehow participated, helped the whole conflict to escalate. We can say that they're not part of the game, but they physically are part of the conflict.
Very much so. They're hosting our facilities with which we're attacking. They're hosting our airplanes. They're hosting our ships. You can't get out of that. Go back to the discussion we had at Pacific Command many years ago when we were the providing force command. We had all the assets, and we gave them to Central Command when they needed them. And our strictures were never, never, never come out of the ocean. If you're going to operate in the Middle East, if you're going to operate in the Levant, stay at sea until you have to do something from the sea, whether it's opening the Strait of Hormuz, freedom of navigation, or something that makes sense. Never put troops on the ground in the Middle East. Never depend on Saudi Arabia. Never depend on Qatar. Never depend on any of those people with real U.S. vested interest facilities, people, munitions, whatever, on the ground in the Middle East. We have violated that completely. Colonel McGregor talked about that this morning. I agree with Doug 100%. Huge mistake to begin to put our own facilities in places where at any moment the person, the state, the military, whatever, hosting us might turn on us and slit our throats. That's what we're looking at right now, with the Persians leading it. And that's what I meant. I think their strategy of what they're doing to those countries is smart. They're not trying to kill the people. They're trying to kill the assets that belong to us and the people that approve it. That's what they're trying to do.
Larry, when it comes to the initial hours of the conflict, when they started attacking Iran, they started with the supreme leader of Iran, the commanders. And what was in their mind by, assassinating the supreme leader of Iran? By the way, before the conflict coming, if you follow the Israeli media and those medias who are related to Israel, close to Israel, they were talking about the supreme leader is in the tunnels, in the bunkers, he's in his home, Russia. Then he was assassinated in his office at his home.
Yep. He meant to die. He meant to be a martyr. I think. I don't know. I'm not in his head, but very, very smart move by him, because he was a martyr. He will be remembered as a martyr, and maybe as the martyr who started the unraveling of the great Satan empire. Netanyahu loves to kill people at the beginning who are at the head. He has made two tragic mistakes in that regard. More than that, really, if I were to enumerate them all. But Nasrallah was a tragic mistake because Nasrallah was as brilliant a politician, even more so, than he was a leader of a terrorist group or Hezbollah. I don't even like calling them a terrorist group. They are a legitimate entity fighting Israel. So is Hamas. They're not terrorists. They're guerrilla fighters against an occupying entity in violation of international law. That's Hamas. And Hezbollah is I will say, a different kind of entity. And you could say, if you wanted to be strict about it, that they have performed terrorist activities. But basically, they keep everything they do to the local region. I remember talking with a couple of guys that knew Hezbollah really well, and they said, don't ever mess with them. They're not going to attack you unless you're in the region, threatening them in the region, either threatening Lebanon or threatening their connections with Syria and Iran. Then you've got a problem. I don't think the record even reflects that Hezbollah has been guilty of much terrorism of any import against us at all, except when we're in the region in their face, usually with Israel. So killing him was stupid. He represented the reality of Lebanon in a way no one else did. And he was willing to move into the political realm and fight his battles there rather than in the terrorist realm, if you want to call them terrorists. I refuse to do so. And they killed him. They killed him. And what did they get in exchange? They got a series of leaders who are back to the old, we want to kill you, Israel, and we don't want any political solution for Lebanon. And what are they doing? They're destroying Lebanon. Israel's getting ready to mount an operation, although I agree with Doug. Again, this morning he was talking about, I'm not sure how many of those 90,000 in the call-up of the reservists are going to show up. I'm not either. I'll be surprised if half of them show up. Netanyahu wants to mount a new invasion of Lebanon. That's been his intent all along. But what he loves doing is decapitating leaders, and that is not always the best strategy. That's the strategy of a coward, fundamentally. The strategy of a coward, because he does not know what he's doing when he does it. And the reason he's doing it is because he fears that is going to be used on him. That's another thing that's happening right now. You notice how Netanyahu's moving around? Cyprus. Now I understand he's flying clandestinely into Miami to meet Trump at Mar-a-Lago or something like that. I don't know who's telling me the truth, but Netanyahu can't be found because he's winging around through the air. He's scared to death. He's afraid they're going to kill him, and he rightfully so, because they probably are going to kill him. So this conflict has dimensions that come back to my original point. The White House, the president, the secretary of defense, the secretary of state, none of this entourage, other than making money out of it, which they did very successfully, thank you very much, they haven't contemplated it in a way that will it be revelatory and tell them what they're in for. And they're going to be in for an incredibly negative development situation.
Larry, what do you make of what Tucker Carlson said yesterday? He said that yesterday, he said, in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Mossad agents who intended to carry out bombings in those countries were arrested.
Wouldn't surprise me at all, because Iran has shared intelligence and the others are not stupid. I've found when I was dealing with Turki al-Faisal, for example, when he was head of the Saudi intelligence, he knew as much as most Mossad people I was talking with. Pretty smart guy. Didn't like him at all. I felt like I was sitting beside evil every time I sat down beside him. But that's true of the head of MI6 too. So these intel people are usually some of the smartest people in these countries. So I wouldn't put it past them and others to know exactly where they're operating, their counterparts are operating. Did they share that information with Iran? Maybe, but I don't think they even needed to, because I think Iran's pretty smart now about it too. They have basically been awakened. Their awakening started when Saddam Hussein, backed by the United States, invaded them. in September of 1980, I think, right after the revolution. And they were on their heels, and we put them on their heels. We gave Saddam Hussein the precursors, at least, and maybe some of the actual chemical weapons, and backed him. We didn't like Iran. They had pushed out our Shah. They had negated everything we'd worked for. We didn't like them, so we backed Saddam Hussein. I can still remember the CIA reports on Saddam Hussein. This is a direct quote. We can work with this guy. We can work with this guy. Yeah, right. And we were backing him, and Iran was on its heels. And then all of a sudden, human wave attacks and everything else against chemical weapons, they turned the tide, and they started pushing on Iran. What did we do? We then mounted Operation El Dorado Canyon, or not El Dorado Canyon, Ernest Will, and Operation Praying Mantis, and several others, and we joined the fight. When the Ayatollah quit, it was after Vincennes shot down the Iranian Airbus, killed something like 290 Iranian civilians, and he said, that's too much. I can't take this. I can fight Iraq, but I can't fight the empire behind Iraq. And so they accepted the UN resolution and ended the war. Since that time, during that war, and since that time, being treated the way they've been treated again and again and again by both Israel and the United States, they have learned. They have learned that you cannot deal with the duplicitous Israelis. You cannot deal with the duplicitous United States. Doesn't matter whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And by the way, one of the people that stopped the action in our Congress to at least try to put some legal barriers in Trump's way to go to war in Iran was Chuck Schumer, the leading Democrat. Chuck Schumer. And you have no idea, do you, Nemo, why he would do that? He's bought and paid for by AIPAC. Bought and paid for by AIPAC. So look at that problem in the empire. We have politicians who should be standing up and being counted with regard to unconstitutional actions like this war, and they are actually obstructing the process of being upright. You can't make this stuff up. We are a disaster, Nima, a disaster. Got our own people in the opposite political party coming in and helping the political party that wants this war in Iran. Although I'm beginning to doubt that the Republican Party, even in itself, in majority, supports this. You've seen the polls? 29% of Americans support this conflict. I wish their lack of support was a little more coherent because there's all kinds of different reasons, but it's not good for the Republicans, that's for sure. It's not good for MAGA, already falling off this unparalleled support for Israel. It's not good for Trump's base. And that's not good for our federal republic, I don't think, because when Trump realizes he's really got a problem and the Republicans realize they've really got a problem in the midterms, he's going to cancel them. He's going to do everything he can to screw up the democratic process. So we're looking at this war not only adding to our ills and our worries overseas with our allies and the economy and everything else, we're looking at it forcing Trump into some sort of maneuver that will be designed to keep him in power or to keep the Republicans in power, which is not going to be good for us.
I think many people should remember Charlie Kirk,
yes,
what he was doing and why he was murdered.
Yes.
He was assassinated. And this has everything to do with what's going on right now between the United States and Iran.
You bet. You bet. And if you can't lay Charlie Kirk's assassination at Netanyahu's feet in terms of evidence, you can certainly lay it at his feet the same way you can lay Yitzhak Rabin's assassination at his feet. He stirred up the people who went and did it.
Netanyahu yesterday, Larry said in his interview on Fox News, said that Iran targets civilians. We target mass terrorists. They argue, Larry, that they have a lot of intelligence coming out of Iran. And in the initial hours of the attack, they attacked a school with more than 160.
Yeah, 160. Yeah.
160 schoolgirls
I saw some of the pictures.
being murdered, Larry. It was a huge shock for the whole country. The Israel that argues that they know everything about Iran, they go and hit a school, which is obviously, if you look at the map on Google Map, you can find that school is there not to hit it, but they hit it.
Well, look at all the civilians, Nima, that they have killed in Gaza. The record is nothing like what the health ministry says it is. They have a record established for killing journalists. More journalists have been killed by Israel than any other single country in the world. And that includes the empire, which has waged wars from 1945 forward almost unendingly. They have killed more journalists. They have killed more UN workers. They have killed more innocent civilians, men, women, children, older men, older women in Gaza. I think the total in Gaza is well over 200,000. Well over 200,000. I said that in the presence of a person whom I somewhat respect, but who is just too much of a Zionist for me to have a lot of respect for him. And he essentially said, so what? So what? I wish it were 250 million or 250,000. That's what we're going to do with this Gaza City that Trump envisions. We're going to pave it over and put all those dead people in their graves, because they don't want to resurrect all those bodies. They don't want to pull all those bodies out of the rubble. We're talking about 250,000 people, maybe. Rivals anything in a singular way that the Nazis did in World War II. And we're there, as Gidon Levy and others keep pointing out. We're there. We're supporting it. They could not do this without us.
We've seen 3 fighter jets being shot down by, the United States says by the air defense system of Kuwait, which is, but Iranians say it was
very expensive F-15 fighters. Yeah. Very expensive.
It seems that Iran has managed to integrate. They have 3 air defense systems right now as we talk. They have the Russian, Iranian, and Chinese all integrated. And
with those new radars. Yeah. That see everywhere.
If they can shoot a fighter jet right at the border between Syria and between Iraq and Syria, if Iraq and Kuwait, between Iraq on the border, it was in Iraq, but it was close to Kuwait, and Donald Trump doesn't even accept that. I don't know how many casualties did they have so far, and they're talking about 6. I would assume that would be much, much greater than what he said so far.
I suspect so, and I suspect some of them are civilians, because a lot of the support nature around our facilities is civilians. Mm-hmm. Former military maybe, but nonetheless, when they're working there, they're working for a contractor. That's why I say the NEOs are important, because there are probably more. If I remember the F-77 forms, F-77 form is when they come in from all around the country in which the ambassador is vested, and they tell you who's an American, where they live, and what their evacuation procedures should be should something happen where you have to evacuate them. They're not necessarily kept up to speed and up to date all the time, but they're the best thing you have. And when you look at those forms and you understand how many people we have in the region, it's a pretty significant number of people to evacuate.
Netanyahu yesterday said in his interview that Donald Trump planned Iran war before his second term even started. How much of reality is in this sort of claims? Do you think that he's right, or?
Donald Trump doesn't plan anything. He doesn't know how to plan. He doesn't even plan real estate deals. He just uses bravado and force and the wealth that's behind him to complete deals. That's kind of the way he approached this. That's the way Witkoff and Kushner approached Lavrov and Putin with regard to Ukraine, and that's why they haven't made any progress, because Lavrov and Putin have figured them out. I think probably the Iranians figured them out too. A little late, but they nonetheless figured them out. Cultural clashes like that or cultural come-togethers like that are forgivable for one side not understanding the other side, especially when the other side is lying all the time. But I think from the point of view of people like Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, and others, particularly senators, Rubio and Graham, you're right that this has been planned for a long time, not in detail, but they've been very much supportive of whatever the Pentagon was doing with regard to operational contingency planning about taking Iran down. Nima, when I went into the Pentagon in 2002, before Rumsfeld forbade me to come into the Pentagon, I was briefed on contingency plans against North Korea, against Syria, against Iraq, against Iran, thank you, and against other countries I won't name because that would be, anyway, let's just say there were other countries in there. And what you watch with the contingency plan is when it goes to the next shelf, if you will, when they actually start feeding it with time, phase, force, and deployment data, logistics data, and so forth. That's when it becomes a plan that you look at and say, I anticipate that plan being used. It's not just on the shelf as a contingency plan. We had plans for fighting Britain in the 1930s. The military does that sort of thing. They do contingency planning. But when it gets sourced, was the term we used at the time, term planners used, when it gets sourced and it gets pulled off the shelf and updated and sourced, someone's thinking about going after that particular state or combination of states. Well, I saw all of this in the Pentagon as early as the turn of the century, right after Bush was elected. And I was stunned. One reason I was kicked out of the Pentagon, because I was briefed by a 3-star Air Force general, for example, on the war with Korea. And when I asked the question, you're thinking about taking on North Korea? Do you realize what kind of casualties you're going to create? And we didn't know at that moment that they had a nuclear weapon. Well, they weren't concerned about it. And I got the feeling that they were actually thinking about North Korea in terms of a preemptive attack on North Korea. What diverged or diverted them from that was the concentration on the clean break strategy and the countries they had to take down in the Levant. At whose request? Please, whose request were they doing this? The same Mossad agents who were investing the office I was standing in. The Undersecretary of Defense for Plans, the number 3 man in the Pentagon, Mossad was in his office. And they stayed in his office throughout the Iraq War. So they were in there orchestrating these plans in the way they wanted to. And so that, thank God, that pulled the Air Force off the war they wanted with North Korea. This Air Force general had the gall to tell me, a man who'd been on the peninsula as long as probably anybody in the United States Army, on and off again, 5 team spirit exercises under my belt. He had the gall to tell me that the Air Force could win the war. The Air Force was going to be so precise with its bombing and so devastating with its bombing of the North Korean legions that they'd win the war before they ever got to the DMZ. This is the kind of people sometimes that take over the planning process. God forbid that we should have ever implemented that plan. But I did realize that we were thinking about implementing some of the plans otherwise briefed, and that's what we've been doing. And this is the latest one. This is the latest plan. This is the end of the clean break strategy, which is to bring down the leadership in Iran. I lost you.
Moments ago, Donald Trump said Iran will lay down their weapons. And it's so difficult for me to understand what is happening in the mind of Donald Trump. But that it's so difficult to understand this guy. I cannot understand him anymore. And let's go in some scenarios, because as we talk, I've just learned that cruise missiles toward the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier group Iran launched air cruise missiles toward aircraft carrier. If something big happens to one of these aircraft carriers, what is the consequences? What are the consequences of these sort of attacks for Donald Trump?
Well, let me take the implications as your first comment. What I'm hearing, and I admit to your listeners, I have no way of confirming this. I'm just hearing it in sources that in the past have proved somewhat reliable. Trump is actually putting it out that the Iranians have made overtures for talks. People whom I know on the other side of the coin, so to speak, in Iran and elsewhere, are saying that's bull, that the Iranians haven't made any overtures whatsoever, and in fact have rebuffed our overtures. So that puts a little different spin on Trump too. But to your point, that's 5,000 men and women going down. That's probably 2,000, and I'm basing this on an article in Proceedings that an admiral wrote recently, because I've been away from carrier battle groups for a long time. But it was part of my study. It was part of my specialty at the Naval War College. That's going to put 2,000 people in Davy Jones's locker, dead, in other words, probably, depending on the type of missile or torpedo that hits it. The wake-homing torpedo that the Russian subs would use, for example, comes up under it and breaks its back. So what you have is the carrier going down instantly almost. The bow and the stern filled with water, it cracks like this. If you've ever seen one of them, they're extremely long ships. When it cracks in the middle, both ends, as it were, fill up with seawater pretty fast, and it goes down catastrophically. So you're going to lose 2,000 right away, dead. Maybe 2,000 in the water, and maybe another 1,000 you won't know about for a week or two. And the real problem this admiral was pointing at, who wrote this article, we don't have enough berth space, deck space even, on the escorts to pick these people up. So at best, they get picked up by, say, an Iranian patrol boat or a small Iranian ship or whatever. The Navy is not that well equipped for deep sea operations. And they're prisoners of war. At worst case, they stay in the water and drown and die, or they get eaten by sharks or whatever. Not a good thing. Even in the Mediterranean, where Lincoln to be hit and go down in the Mediterranean, there's some deep, deep water in the Mediterranean. You might lose her as rapidly, and you'd lose a lot of people there. Let's say you lost one. Front page above the fold, right side of the Washington Times, 2,000 sailors killed. This is... I have to think that Iran is doing some double thinking about striking a U.S. warship in a way that would sink it. I have no doubt they can. No doubt whatsoever that they can. But that is a really catastrophic thing. And then on the other side of the coin, I have to come back to my original discussion with you about the nature of this conflict. Iran is in it for life or death to the bitter end. So would they do that? Probably. Are they saving that for a dramatic moment? Probably.
Yeah. Donald Trump is trying to put a lot of pressure on Spain, for example. He said that he will cut all trade relations with Spain due to, their refusal to allow their bases being used for an attack against Iran.
This is what I mean about we're making our allies as angry as our friends, as angry as our enemies. This is incredible what we're doing. It's incredible. We had the problem with Spain with the El Dorado Canyon when Ronald Reagan wanted to launch the planes out of Britain and elsewhere, wanted to launch them as expeditiously as possible to hit Gaddafi in Libya. You remember that operation, April 2000 and when was it? April 2008 or somewhere in there. No, not that. It was Reagan's administration, so it must have been before 2000. 98, I think it was. We called it El Dorado Canyon, I think. And we sent FB-117s and FB-111 bombers and such. And one of the pilots was a student of mine, told me all about it. And Spain refused. It made us have to go a long way around. but they refused. We didn't say things to them that were unally-like, unfriendly-like. This administration is nuts. I'm going to put a tariff on you. I'm going to ruin you. I'm going to ruin you because you wouldn't let me have overflight rights, or you wouldn't support me in this way or that. That's not the way you treat allies. That's horrible treatment. But this is Donald Trump. He does not understand. He does not understand diplomacy. He does not understand international relations. He does not understand allies. He does not understand Iran. He does not understand, most decidedly, the nature of the war he has started.
Axios reported that the UAE is considering taking military actions against Iran. How?
Little Sparta. Little Sparta will be eliminated quickly. What are they going to do? How many soldiers do they have? How many battalions do they have? How many aircraft do they have? How many real methods of delivering any pain on Iran do they have, other than maybe terrorism or blowing up oil facilities or whatever? And they do that, they're going to be eradicated. There won't be any attacking U.S. facilities in the UAE. They'll be attacking the UAE. This is all braggadocio from people who don't know what they're talking about. UAE couldn't even defeat al-Ansar. They couldn't defeat the Houthis in combination with Saudi Arabia. I would be trembling in my boot if I were Iran. Oh, the UAE is coming after us. Little Sparta. Well, we'll be big Athens.
Yeah. Larry, as an outcome of the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran, we've seen Houthis, Yemenis, together with Iraqis, Hezbollah in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon. They came out without an official, the government didn't officially ask them to join it, but they have joined. Iraq is doing people. You see the people, how the people are moved in the whole region. I haven't seen such a thing for such a long time. I don't know, even during the Iran-Iraq war, you remember that it wasn't like this. It wasn't like this at all. The situation has totally changed. That's why I think I don't see Donald Trump understanding what he's, stepping in.
I'll tell you something, Nima. If Sisi and other leaders like him in the region, particularly Jordan and Iraq, realize just how ultimately vulnerable Israel is right now, and even coordinated a reasonably synchronized assault on Israel, they would roll over it like crap through a goose, as Patton said. They would destroy Israel. They would take Israel in a matter of hours. They won't do that because, one, they're cowards. Two, they're scared to death of the United States and current leader of the United States with regard to the money that rolls into them. And three, they're not confident that their own people wouldn't be behind them, attacking them at the same time they were attacking the Israelis. So, but otherwise, Israel's position right now is incredibly tenable. I wouldn't want to be in Israel's shoes right now, particularly with regard to their military ability to withstand any kind of concerted attack, no matter how ill-coordinated it was, because they haven't fought a war like this in 20 years. Basically, Nima, the IDF, the Air Force in particular, is composed of a bunch of cowards who love to kill kids and women and old men. And you put them up against at least a reasonably in resolute armored force, they'd probably lose within 72 hours. And you'd be hitting them in the rear basically because they're getting ready to put that force in Lebanon. What a time. What a time. But no one's got the courage. No one's got the moxie. No one's got the military leaders. And no one's got the desire really to disturb what is to them their situation with regard to billions of dollars coming in every time they turn around from the empire.
Larry, the strategy of the Iranian army, IRGC, it seems to me like what it was during the last days of the 12-day war. They're not going in with intensity. They're not sending a lot of missiles, drones. It wasn't like this. It's so much strategic the way that they're started, that they trying to keep it you know consistently attacking, gradually attacking Israel. And
they're mostly attacking, even now they're mostly attacking military or military associated targets. They're not attacking civilians except maybe by accident, or the military's underneath them, which Israel has been revealed to have done far more than anybody thought, hiding their military underneath civilians. That's going to be destabilizing too when that gets out amongst the Jewish citizens of Israel. They were being used as shields.
Larry, what is happening to the vice president of the United States, J.D. Vance? What has happened to him? This guy has totally changed. It seems so strange, and these people have changed a lot.
And he can't be fired. He was elected too. Trump can't turn around and fire him. He can neutralize him in a certain respect, but the more he neutralizes a sane voice within the administration, the more crazy he looks, the more insane he looks. If he turned on J.D. Vance in a visible, what would I want to say, in a less than clandestine, covert manner, and I don't even think that would work with J.D. Vance, but if he turned on him publicly, J.D. Vance would gain stature, not Donald Trump. And yet he doesn't seem to be willing to do that, which makes me think, Nima, he's not the person we think he might be. He really is as much in agreement with what Trump is doing. It's just the particulars and the insanities that bother him as Trump. I can't differentiate him yet significantly enough. I have to keep coming back to his major supporter and the person who put him in the Senate and the person who made him politically viable, Peter Thiel, a despicable individual.